This is JC Setting the Record Straight podcast. I'm your host, JC. On this channel, we set the record straight. That means we fact check and correct commonly believed misinformation and propaganda. As I have stated in many of my videos, I am an anarchist. As an anarchist, I believe that any governmental authority which is not based on consent is illegitimate. As an anarchist, I am a staunch proponent of laissez-faire free market competition. I am against all attempts by the government to interfere with the free market. Government comes at the barrel of a gun. All governmental regulations are acts of violence. Government regulations are enforced either by throwing you in a cage, taking your property, or killing you. Those who support big government also support state-sponsored violence. Under natural law, you have an inalienable right to use your God-given skills and talents to earn a livelihood. You should not need permission from the government to enter into a private contract.
Should you need a government permission slip before you can earn an honest living? It's called occupational licensing. And a new national report released by the Institute for Justice shows just how widespread and costly it has become. In the 1950s, only 1 in 20 workers needed a government license to work. Today, it's 1 in 3. To get a license to work, the government forces you to clear one hurdle after another: education or training, passing tests, paying fees, and more. Too often, these hurdles take time and money to jump. They make it harder and harder for people to find jobs and to build new businesses that create jobs. How much harder? To find out, we examined licensing laws for 102 occupations in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. We looked only at low and moderate income jobs like interior designers, massage therapists, and shampooers, not doctors or lawyers. On average, these licenses require you to pay $209, pass an exam, and complete more than 275 days, or about 9 months of training and experience. 1/3 of these licenses take 1, 2, or even as many as 6 full years to earn. That's a lot of time and effort spent getting permission to work instead of working. And we haven't even talked about costs, like tuition for required schooling.
So as I previously stated, governmental authority which is not based on consent is illegitimate. So they're telling you that these licenses are for the public's good, but there is no such thing as the public. The public is just a collection of individuals. So if something is not good for me as the individual consumer, then it is not beneficial to the public. No one should be sacrificed for the benefit of the collective. Just because some individuals are not smart enough to engage in smart business dealings does not mean that everyone else should suffer. There are private watchdog and accreditation agencies which perform the same role as the government. The issue is the government's use of force. As the consumer, the license should come from the consumer, not from the government. The government is not the one who has to pay for these goods and services. Now, some of you may not think that this is a big deal, but these occupational licenses have brought people to financial ruin. There are many people who have tens of thousands of dollars in student loan debt, but they can't even work in their given trade because the government won't allow them. When it comes time to discussing canceling student loans, everyone wants to talk about personal responsibility. They're going to tell you that you took out the student loans, therefore you should pay them. What they're not going to tell you is that it was the government's occupational licensing requirements which force you to take out those student loans in the first place. Before the education industrial complex, most people were either self-taught or they learned through apprenticeships. It is the government's fault that people are taking out student loans. They're the ones telling people that if they don't get an education, they're going to be flipping burgers. Then they get the education and they're still flipping burgers, except now they have tens of thousands of dollars in student loan debt. The government created the problem and they need to fix it. For the purpose of this video, we're talking about low-skilled vocations.
The stated purpose of occupational licensing is to protect consumers. These licenses often require people to take classes and pay costly fees before workers may join certain professions. But some states require licenses for hair braiding, coffin making, or even fortune telling, professions that don't put consumers at risk. In these instances, the rules are less about consumer protection and more about protecting existing providers by stopping competition. That's why the strongest supporters for these requirements are typically those already in an industry. They lobby for new rules that apply only to potential entrants. These requirements drive up prices, helping current workers but hurting consumers and job seekers.
Now, I've already talked to y'all about government-imposed barriers to entry. Although the government has created antitrust legislation to prevent the monopolies of private corporations, the government doesn't seem to have a problem imposing its own barriers to entry and forming its own monopolies. Government-imposed monopolies are far worse than private monopolies because they are imposed through physical force. According to Ayn Rand, all monopolies are government-imposed. Private corporations cannot form monopolies because they don't have the power of physical force. Private monopolies always have to compete with other corporations. Government-imposed monopolies don't. Therefore, it is a complete barrier to entry. So now I'm going to address the hurdles that those who braid hair have to go through just to earn a living.
Arizona native and accomplished stylist Essence Farmer has been braiding hair since the age of 12.
I think a lot of Black women just got to a place where they wanted to embrace their natural and authentic selves and their own beauty because we've always been shown another standard.
Her iconic hair design featured in Essence magazine and in the National Museum of African American History in Washington, D.C.
Whatever flows out of you, you give to your client, and your client's able to just be able to wear it as almost a piece of art.
But it wasn't always easy for her to be that artist. Arizona law made it difficult to open up her own hair braiding salon.
They told me I had to have a license.
At the time, Arizona's Board of Cosmetology required 1,600 hours of classroom instruction, even though not a single hour of natural hair braiding instruction was included in the program.
I took up issue with it because the things that I did, which was braids, locks, twists, they didn't teach nor did they test on it.
And at a cost of at least $10,000.
All that time that I would have spent going to cosmetology school and the money, to me, just didn't make sense.
Shahendria Powell braids the hair of an 11-year-old girl. Powell, now 24, has been braiding hair since she was 14.
The best part about it for me is my clients look on their face after they get up, they be happy.
Although she may be good at what she does, here in Louisiana, it is required for braiders to have a cosmetology license. And to obtain the license takes hundreds of hours for class that costs thousands of dollars in tuition.
Right now it's a process for me to get back in school and finish, so right now I really don't know.
Braiding hair is her only source of income.
Right now, yes. Until I get a job and I start working. I really don't see a difference in having a license. In my opinion, the paper don't matter. When your work speaks for itself and people see you do good work, it don't matter to me. Whether you have a paper or not.
The Louisiana State Board of Cosmetology says the regulation is simply due to health and safety.
So the government is claiming that a license is required for safety reasons. However, these women who braid hair are not even using chemicals, nor are they using heat. This is the problem. The government gets to make up whatever rationale they want to make, and they don't actually have to say or articulate what it is. They can't tell you what the actual safety justifications are. They're just going to claim a state interest in protecting public health, and everyone is supposed to take their word for it. This is a pretextual justification for mere economic protectionism. All they're doing is protecting the profits of current practitioners. If you want to know who benefits from these occupational licensing requirements, you have to figure out who lobbied for them in the first place. Occupational licensing requirements are always lobbied for by current practitioners in the same field. So these were cosmetologists who didn't want to compete. In any given trade, there is supply and demand. The goal of occupational licensing is to create an artificial scarcity for services. By eliminating competition, there are fewer people available to give said services. Therefore, those individuals can charge more for their services. The whole thing is a scam.
Requirements for government permission to engage in various occupations were common centuries ago. The rise of free markets was aided by the rise and spread of classical economics in the 19th century. Although both product markets and labor markets became freer in the 19th century, the forces that sought protection from competition were never completely eradicated. Gradually, over the years, more occupations began to require licenses, a process accelerated in bad economic times, such as the Great Depression of the 1930s, or after government intervention in the economy began to become more accepted again. Although the rationale for requiring licenses in particular occupations has usually been to protect the public from various risks created by unqualified or unscrupulous practitioners, the demand for such protection has seldom come from the public. Almost invariably, the demand for requiring a license has come from existing practitioners in the particular occupation. That the real goal is to protect themselves from competition is suggested by the fact that it is common for occupational licensing legislation to exempt existing practitioners, who are automatically licensed, as if it can be assumed that the public requires no protection from incompetent or dishonest practitioners already in the occupation.
For those of you who are not familiar with Thomas Sowell was the economist cited by Just Purely Things for the proposition that white people were slaves too, and black people also owned slaves. Now, Thomas Sowell is no historian. However, he is spot on when it comes to economics. Anyone who knows anything about economics knows that occupational licenses are self-serving. Occupational licenses are always pushed for by current practitioners. I didn't learn this from Thomas Sowell. I learned this based on my own research. Thomas Sowell was not the only one who said this. There's also a libertarian by the name of Milton Friedman who essentially said the same thing.
Nobody can become a physician unless he is licensed to be a physician by a government licensing board. Now they ask you, who do you suppose is competent to decide who should be a physician? Only other physicians. So the membership of licensing boards of medical groups is always composed of physicians. And that has, in fact, been a key element in the restriction of entry into medicine and in keeping the number of physicians to a lower level than it otherwise would have been. This happens to be a subject in which I once did an enormous amount of work. I wrote a book some 30-odd years ago on incomes from independent professional practice, in which I examined in great detail the practices of the American Medical Association, the American Dental Association, and other organizations. And I decided at that time that the effect of limitation of entry into medicine had been to keep down the number of physicians and to increase the average income of physicians at that time by something between 17 to 30%. Now, the recent figures would probably be in the same direction. Of course, if you talk to physicians, they'll say, why, the reason we're in favor of licensing is in order to have a very high quality of medical practice. But then if you look at the rules they have followed, some of them have no relationship whatsoever to quality of medical practice.
Listen, people can say that I'm bitter because I didn't pass the bar exam. The reality is that the bar exam has absolutely nothing to do with the practice of law, and I'm going to address that when I do my response to my discussion with Judge Joe Brown. But this isn't just about the bar exam. This is about all occupational licenses. The government is running the biggest okey-doke on the public, and no one is talking about it. Because if you were to talk to everyday people about the legal field, the medical field, or any other vocation which requires an advanced degree, they're probably not going to have any sympathy for you. They're going to say, oh, you have a Juris Doctorate, so therefore you're better off than me. But really you're not, because you have all these student loans and you can't even get a basic job. You can't even get a job at Walmart because nobody's going to hire you. They're going to say that you're overqualified. But it affects everyone. It's going to drive up the costs of legal services. It's going to drive up the cost of medical services. This is why it's so expensive to receive medical care. They have also given themselves an unconstitutional monopoly. And I learned this from talking to doctors, because they also have the same problem, because even when they're licensed in one state, they have to be re-licensed in other states even though it's the same exact medicine. This is about eliminating competition. It is what it is. I don't know why people want to skirt around the issue and pretend that anyone who is against occupational licenses is disgruntled. If I didn't know any better, I would just go along with it, but I do know better, and it pisses me off. It pisses me off that no one is doing anything about it. Now, I had a nonprofit to fight against law licenses, but I received very little support. When I went to the Institute for Justice, they wouldn't touch the issue with a 10-foot pole, even though their organization is against occupational licenses, yet they were unwilling to fight against law licenses. When I went to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and proved that bar exams are not job-related and they have a disparate impact on African Americans, that attorney told me that she went up against ExxonMobil and even she would not go up against the Bar Association. Yet I was foolish enough to do it, and they destroyed my damn life. When I wrote to my state representatives, the state representatives told me that this was a federal issue. When I wrote to my federal representatives, the federal representative told me that it was a state issue. Everybody gave me the runaround because they were afraid to deal with it. There was only one state senator who stuck his neck out to help me, and then he lost his race for re-election after serving several consecutive terms. Judge Joe Brown set up talking about how he was against standardized tests, yet he supports bar exams, which are standardized tests. People can talk about how we live in a democracy and we have free will, but you clearly don't have free will when you need the government's permission just to earn a living. The expression is that if you don't work, you don't eat. But if the government won't let you work, how are you supposed to eat? Because everyone wants to say you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but what are you supposed to do when the government regulates your use of your own bootstraps? Now, most people would just comply and go on about their business, but this isn't right. It's not right, and something needs to be done about it. People can put their heads in the sand and pretend that they don't know. Well, now you know. I just told you. What are you going to do? Thanks for your support. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to hit the notification bell so that you will know when I upload new content.